Hello, I'm going to read tonight a bedtime story. It's called The Pig Who Wanted to Fly. Pendleton was a chubby little piglet with a big dream. Clarence and Clarissa, the other piglets who shared the pig pen with Pendleton, dreamed of winning blue ribbons at the annual agricultural show. Not Pendleton. His own dream was much more exciting. Pendleton dreamed that someday, some way, somehow, he would become a pig who could fly. Pendleton's fixation with flying came about one day when he happened to look up and spied a balloon floating by. The balloon had drifted lazily through the sky and sailed over the farmhouse. Pendleton had never seen a balloon before. The balloon was round and pink, and so was he. So naturally, Pendleton thought it must be a little pink piglet floating through the air. "Wow," squealed Pendleton. "Just look at that chubby little piglet fly. I sure wish I could do that." Bathsheba, the biggest and oldest pig in the pen, lifted her head up from the trough where she was eating. "That's not a piglet, that's a balloon," she said with a smile. "Unlike chubby little piglets, balloons are very lightweight. That's why they can fly." The pink balloon drifted lazily in the air, then soared up and looped around on a gust of wind before floating over the yard. It was the most beautiful and graceful thing Pendleton had ever seen. From that day on, all he wanted to do was fly. Awake or asleep, Pendleton constantly dreamed about drifting and looping around on the wind and floating through the sky just like the pink balloon. Pendleton began spending most of his days sitting in the middle of the pig pen, staring up at the sky, searching for another balloon. Clarence and Clarissa thought he was silly, but that didn't stop Pendleton from dreaming. When no other balloons drifted by, Pendleton began noticing how little insects jumped up and seemed to catch the wind to fly. Unfortunately, Pendleton understood why he never jumped up. He came right back down again with a great big thump. Sometimes it hurt to land flat on his face, but that did not stop Pendleton from dreaming. He began to watch the birds, learning how they managed to stay in the air. He saw they had feathers and wings, things he didn't have, but that didn't stop Pendleton from dreaming. Every day, Bathsheba watched him. She would shake her head and say, "Pendleton, you are a pig. You are not a bug. You are not a bird. You are not a balloon. You cannot fly." Every day, Bathsheba would try to explain to Pendleton the difference between flying creatures with wings, lightweight balloons full of air, and chubby little piglets. That still did not stop Pendleton from dreaming. "Get your head out of the clouds, Pendleton. You are a fine pig, so just be proud of what you are," Bathsheba snorted angrily. "Pigs are supposed to eat a lot and grow fat like Clarence. See how nice and round he's getting? Pigs are supposed to roll in the mud to soothe their skin like Clarissa. Just look at how her hide glows. Pigs are supposed to snooze on clean straw instead of jumping up and down. Pigs are supposed to grow big and shiny and win blue ribbons at the annual agricultural show. Pigs are not supposed to fly," snorted Bathsheba. But that didn't stop Pendleton from dreaming. Pendleton knew what pigs were supposed to do, of course, but he just didn't think it was very exciting. He looked up to the sky again and dreamed of how wonderful it would be to fly above the pig pen, high above the farm and the countryside, even if he could only do it once. Not long afterwards, spring arrived, as it does every year, and with it came the annual agricultural show. The show, very similar to a county fair, is where all the area farmers could display samples of prize-winning crops and show off their best-looking livestock. The annual agriculture show also had carnival rides and cotton candy and games to play, competitions to enter, and good things to eat. On the day of the show, Bathsheba, Clarissa, Clarence, and Pendleton were loaded into the truck of the farmer's pickup and taken to the showgrounds. Bathsheba had been to the show many times before, so she was quite relaxed. She lay down in a corner of the truck, closed her eyes, and thought of all the blue ribbons she had won in her youth. She was quite proud of the fact that the farmer continued to bring her to the show and enter her in competitions. It was the first time Pendleton, Clarissa, and Clarence had been invited to the annual agricultural show. So naturally, they were excited. Clarissa and Clarence tried to act as if they made his trip all the time. So the two of them lay down next to Bathsheba. Now Pendleton, he wanted to see everything from the back of the pickup truck. Things looked different high off the ground, with the wind whistling past his ears. It was easier for Pendleton to imagine what he would be like flying. As the truck drove along the road, Pendleton squealed with joy. He trotted from one side of the truck to the other, trying to see all there was to see and catch as much wind in his face as possible. Bathsheba and Clarissa and Clarence thought Pendleton's behavior was every bit as silly as usual. They ignored him and huddled close to each other, waiting for the journey to be over. Finally, they arrived at the showgrounds and began driving towards the parking area. Pendleton was thrilled by all the bright colors, strange noises, and new smells. Suddenly, he saw the most wonderful things of all. They looked like flying machines. Pendleton saw a huge wheel that reached from the ground all the way up to the sky. It turned around and around, but in it but it didn't go forward. People sat in seats attached to the wheel, and Pendleton heard happy laughter as it turned. He saw people enter cars that began to whirl and spin, swoop up and down and loop around. The faster the cars spun and the higher they looped, the louder the people screeched with delight. He looked up and saw a line of chairs attached to a thick cable. People were sitting in the chairs, dangling their feet, pointing and calling as they moved slowly over the showgrounds. Pendleton thought it was all like a magical, wonderful dream, and yet he was certainly wide awake. And then he saw what he was looking for: balloons. Pendleton spied a stall that sold very large, brightly colored, helium-filled balloons. The balloons seemed to stretch up to the sky, tugging at their strings, struggling to be free, to float above the crowd. Pendleton knew just how they felt. The truck stopped at last, and the farmer put Pendleton, Clarissa, and Clarence in one pen, and then led Bathsheba to another, further along. Be good little pigs now, Bathsheba warned. Good luck in your competitions. Clarissa went straight to the clean straw in the corner to snooze, while Clarence headed straight for the trough to eat. But Pendleton wanted to see as much of the showgrounds as he could. He stood by the pen's gate and pushed his snout through the narrow opening. He looked all about, trying to see the balloon stall and more of the flying things. In his excitement, Pendleton pushed too hard, and the gate eased open a little bit. So naturally, he tried pushing a little harder. Sure enough, the gate could be pushed open just far enough for a chubby little piglet to squeeze through. Suddenly, Pendleton was free. Clarence called out, "Pendleton, where are you going? You'll get lost. Come back." Clarissa called out, "Pendleton, you'll miss your competition. Come back." Their squeals caught the farmer's attention, and he rushed over to the pen to see his piglets were all okay. The farmer quickly noticed the opening in the gate and saw that one piglet was missing. The farmer glanced around and saw Pendleton trotting toward the balloon stall. Once the farmer raised the alarm, the other farmers quickly tried to help him. Everyone began shouting and chasing Pendleton. Although they were only trying to catch him to bring him back to the safety of his pen, Pendleton became frightened. When he saw all the farmers running towards him, the chubby little piglet gave a terrified squeal and took off running. He barreled past the cake stall, upsetting the ladies. He galloped through the apple pie stall, upsetting the pork trays. He skidded into the balloon stall, upsetting himself in a pile of boxes that had been filled with extra balloons and balls of string. There lay chubby little Pendleton flat on his back amidst a rainbow-colored heap of strings and balloons, feet waving wildly in the air. Pendleton began kicking his legs, trying to turn himself right side up, but all he managed to do was get tangled up in something. The something turned out to be the long strings of helium-filled balloons. The balloon man had kept the helium-filled balloons from floating away by placing the strings under a heavy rock. Pendleton's kicking and thrashing about while trying to upend himself toward the balloon strings from beneath the weight, and instead of getting himself back on his feet, the twisting and turning simply managed to tangle and tighten the balloon strings all around him. Before anyone realized what was happening, the balloon started to rise, taking the chubby little piglet up with him. Pendleton stopped kicking and his eyes grew big as saucers. He realized he was being lifted off the ground by the huge bunch of large, brightly colored helium balloons. Up, up, up he rose, higher than the whirly spinning looping machine, higher than the chairs moving over the showgrounds, higher than the big turning wheel. Hooray! Shouted Pendleton happily. I'm flying! He looked down and saw all the people below him running and yelling. They looked up. They looked so small from up here as Pendleton floated out of the showgrounds. He saw the farmer running for his pickup truck. Pendleton thought flying was great fun when he drifted over the town. Buses stopped and people got out and looked up to point at him. When he sailed over the countryside, he realized he was alone, and Pendleton began to get a little nervous. When he passed over the farm, he saw his empty pig pen, and he became a little bit frightened. I think I want to get down now, he thought. But Pendleton realized he didn't know how to get down. Then he became really frightened. I want to get down. I want to go home. Help, he squealed. The colorful balloons and loud squealing attracted three curious birds. They glided through the air and circled around Pendleton. It all seemed very strange to them. You're an odd-looking bird, cooed one bird. Where are your wings? It inquired. Perhaps he's a bug, peered another bird. The third bird flew around the balloons. Pretty thing, isn't he? Quite colorful for a bird or bug or whatever, she chirped. Thank you, but I'm not a bird or a bug, replied Pendleton. I'm a piglet, and it's the balloons that are colorful, not me. And the reason I don't have wings is because pigs aren't supposed to fly, sighed Pendleton. And with that, the chubby little piglet began to cry. Oh, please, he asked the birds. I want to be back down on the ground. Can you help me? He sobbed. The three birds fluttered around the pig and the balloons until they came up with a way to help Pendleton make a soft landing. With their sharp beaks, the birds began to pop the balloons slowly, one by one. As the big bunch of balloons grew smaller, they no longer kept floating upwards. Pendleton's weight made the rest of the balloons start to sink lower and lower. They drifted closer to the ground and was finally started to feel a little bit safer when all of a sudden the balloon sailed beneath the leaves of a big tree and the strings became tangled in its branches. Poor little Pendleton. There he was, dangling from the end of the tree limb, swaying in the breeze, still several feet off the ground. Before Pendleton could get frightened all over again, the farmer arrived in his pickup truck and parked right underneath Pendleton. Quickly scampering up the truck bed, the farmer reached up and plucked Pendleton from the tree. Gently, the farmer tucked the frightened little piglet into a warm sack, sat him in the front seat of the truck, and drove him back home to the pig pen. Pendleton was so glad to be home. Oh, how good the trough, the mud, and the straw looked to Pendleton, especially from down here on the ground. Within moments, the chubby little piglet was happily nestled in the clean bed of straw, sound asleep. But the little pig who wanted to fly finally had. The end. Again, the story was The Pig Who Wanted to Fly. It was written by Judith McGrath, copyrighted in 1999. The illustrations were done by Dennis Cox, also copyrighted in 1999. Thank you. Good night.